trying to do is create a higher degree of respect, and dare I say, both internally and externally. So do you have to register? No. There's nothing here that's mandatory registration. If you choose to be a counselor, you don't have to register. You can be a social program officer. You can call yourself a mental health therapist. You don't have to register. But if you're employed by a health authority in a social work role, you have to register. If you want to call yourself a social worker, you have to register. If you work for a not-for-profit agency, you have to register. It's always disturbing when I meet people and, you know, ask them what they do, and, well, you know, I'm a counselor. Well, what does that mean? Well, I help people. Yeah, I know, but, like, what does that mean? Like, what are you? What's your education? Well, social work. So why don't you say you're a social worker? I don't know. And then you meet others, which will be just dead on between the eyes. I'm a social worker and proud of it. And that's where we need to get to. So why should you register before 2015? And that should be before September 1st, 2015, because that's when the rules change. The requirements that will come into effect will be that a person applying has to do the exam. People that apply before that and are registered, sorry students, I know this is kind of going to be unfair, but so if you've got a degree and you register before then, you don't have to do the exam.
Sorry, John.
Yes?
Quick question. Is it the actual degree in that the way our courses fall and what the school has control over versus what the graduation office has control over within the university is very different? Would you accept a letter that said that the student had completed?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So if
Yes.
my term here will be ending, I'll be completing my BCSW here about mid-July when
Yes.
the practicum ends.
Yes.
And then, you know, I have to wait to get my grades. Is there a way to begin the process and then receive a letter earlier on?
If you were to be able to convince your director to write you a letter of completion, we would accept a letter of completion. Okay.
There is a form on the website.
There is?
Yeah, on the university website so we don't do that anymore as directors. There's a form on the website and you fill it out and then I would authorize it, that you completed your courses and you're waiting for the grades.
Okay.
So.
So what is the exam? The exam is based on minimum standards for public protection. It's based on a core or common set of competencies, practices. Those common competencies come out of something called a practice analysis. So the practice analysis is, and we'll likely get into that a little bit later on, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now. Once the common competencies are identified and questions are written, they're all pre-tested to make sure that they're fair questions, that they test what they're supposed to test for, that they're minimum standards. We don't want to set the barrier way up here. The idea isn't that we prevent people from coming in. The idea is that people who come in are competent and safe to practice. And it's a standardized compensatory model. So we don't have an exam on child protection, for instance. In policy, social work policy, everything goes into one exam.
Is a question?
Yes.
Question.
Yes.
So I know that nurses, and my sister just did that degree.
Yeah.
If they fail the RN exam like 3 times, they're done in the province. Like that's my understanding. Maybe
Yes.
I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Will we have something like that? Like if you, can you just like not be able to do it at a certain point?
We haven't actually determined any kind of limit of exams. There likely will be, but this is social work after all, so my approach and my recommendation to the board would be that you say 3 times. And that more times comes after hearing from the candidate, right? So there's jurisdictions in the States where people have written this exam like 20 times and they keep failing. And the agency goes and says, so what did you do? And the applicant will say, well, nothing. I just go back and write the exam. So the exam, thanks.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Rebecca.
The stats on the exam are stunning. You write the exam, you're going to get a score. If you go back and write the exam again a month later, the chance of you getting exactly the same score is like 99%. If you go back another time, months later, and write it again, chance of getting exactly the same score, about 99%. So people that don't do anything to improve their chances are going to fail again. So I think what we do is say, yeah, sure, go ahead, you have those opportunities, and then tell us what you've done. Because most times when a committee says, well, we want you to come and explain what you've done to improve your chance, people aren't going to show up and say, well, I've done nothing. I want to do it again, but I've done nothing. But there's a whole long discussion that still has to happen in there, between community, between students, between faculty, because we don't know what it looks like. We have some anecdotal stuff, but, right? So what does the exam look? Yeah, another question? Yeah.
Oh, no, just like, if there, I'm assuming, because, as you say, it's social work, if there are people with barriers of different kinds, there will be ways to...
Oh, yeah, no, all
okay.
kinds of accommodations, which is general practice.
Cool.
The one that we are trying to get our heads around is going to be how we deliver it to cultures with oral tradition. And like, I don't make any of these decisions. I'm just sort of the head on the sailboat there, right? It's my neck that sticks out. But it's boards and work groups and committees that do all this. And we've recently had a discussion around cultures with oral tradition with people from the Aboriginal community, and 2 of them will say, absolutely not, no special accommodation at all for that. And 2 of them will go, hold on, stop the bus, no, you have to. So I don't know where that one's going to... Okay? You had a question.
No, you answered it. It was around
okay.
Accommodation for other abilities.
Yeah. The organization that writes the exam is based out of the States, and they have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which actually has a really high threshold for accommodation. So we would, at a minimum, meet that. But extra time, language dictionaries for English as a second language. There's accommodations around lights, around noise, around time, a pretty broad range.
And who's assessing these exams?
Yeah, let's your question first.
Are there going to be resources to study for this? Because it looks like these categories are pretty vague and large. Like, I mean, I could go after some of these ideas in different ways.
We'll get there, yes.
Okay.
Who's assessing these? What do you mean assessing?
Well, once you complete the exam, like, is it just something where they put the multiple choice questions through a little box and out shoots your results, or are we writing these answers down? Are people discussing it? What's happening with that? Like, is there a way to challenge your results? Like, is there a review of your exam?
No.
I see.
No. So the exam is, let's come back to those ones, because I think my next slide deck will answer a whole bunch of those questions. So you're right, they're really big areas here, but sort of gives you a general idea of the scope and breadth of the exam. So, assessment, 28% of the questions are going to be on assessment. Human development, diversity and behavior in the environment, 27%. Okay? There's the master's exam, Same kind of areas, equally vague, a little bit different in terms of the percentages. Here's what we have not yet determined. So the BSW exam is pretty much guaranteed 100%. We don't know what it's going to look like for MSW students. Like I said, we don't know around the oral tradition how we're going to accommodate that. That's something, and there's going to be other stuff that come up. Like there's going to be others that we don't know. We're going slow, okay? Like the MSW, when there is an MSW exam, it's pretty easy for us to say that's the standard. We don't know how it's going to fit actually with Canadian curriculum content. Last thing we want to do is put something in place and have people fail. I've had people within academia, social work academia, tell me that certain students, certain programs will have a 100% failure rate on the MSW exam. Okay? That scares me. Why should students pay a price for something like this? So that's part of the ongoing discussion around how we try to manage that so that we don't actually have students paying a price for something that they shouldn't pay a price on.
So there are different approaches to social work,
Yes?
and in this program, anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this program has a fairly critical, radical, anti-oppressive type approach in most of the classes I've taken. And I've heard rumors that the exam is sort of more based on like a mainstream clinical type approach, and like even in that graph on the last slide, human development was one of the things to the exam. Well, in our human development class, it's very much critical of traditional social work approaches to human development. So I guess I'm just wondering about like if the exam will be created in such a way that's actually more reflective of certain approaches or more mainstream approaches to social work, so that students in this program will be left wondering how to answer things.
Yeah. Come back to that question, okay? We'll come back to that one. Other, okay, let's keep going here. ASWB, this is the organization that actually develops the exam. And I'm gonna go quickly through some of this because the next slide deck actually will answer a whole bunch of questions around how the exam's built, how the questions are developed, where all that comes from, and then we can go from there. So you'll see that there is a whole section on exam preparation. There is an online practice exam, and schools can actually buy a group exam and actually study it as a group. So you know, it's not like we're implementing this and leaving people entirely hung out to dry without any kind of resources. And I will send a copy of these slides to Jackie so she can put them up, so don't worry about the length, because again, the color scheme I've used for some reason has them yellow. Oh, there we go. And then there's some other resources. ASWB, Association of Social Work Boards, they have something called a practice analysis that will go through the actual competencies that make up the exam. It's, if we go back one page, one of those links, it's a great big book, all kinds of stuff in it about what's actually on the exams. In Canada, excuse me, we have the Canadian competencies document. And then, of course, we've got accreditation standards out of CASWE, which also factor into this. Now, let me see if we can do this one. How are we doing so far?
note of that last 2 days.
So lots of perceptions about exams. So this goes a little bit through perception versus reality. And this is a couple years old. This comes from about 2012, so some of the stats are a little bit dated. The exams offered 49 states, Alberta, British Columbia. We use it for the clinical, the registered clinical class. Here's where the statistics come from, the reliability and validity. 33,000 to 34,000. Last year, I think that was up to 36,000 exams administered. This is one of the largest exams administered in North America, likely in the world. It is computer-based testing. And it is delivered through Pearson VUE centers. So I'm going to take a few minutes here. So when you register to do your exam, you go on your own and you can do it anytime. When you go into the testing center, they have very high level of security. They are going to prove who you are. They take a scan of your palm print, not fingerprints, but the palm. And if you are unsuccessful and have to go back and do the exam, they look for a match on the palm print. High stakes testing. They figure that every single one of their tests is worth over $1 million, and they do everything to protect it. Yes?
Where's the data stored?
The data on the exam
Yes.
would be stored in the States.
So is the college looking for another opportunity for such as opposed to having my palm print be subject to the American Patriots Act?
Now, I don't know that the palm print is stored in the States.
Okay.
And the answer is, no, we're not. We've had all kinds of discussion nationally in Canada about developing our own. We've also had lots of discussion about developing an exam called an objectively structured clinical exam. And the problem with both of them is, like this exam will cost, it's $230 US. For us to do anything close to that would cost candidates double, triple that. And if we are looking at an objectively structured exam, if you look at nursing, dentistry, they generally charge about $3,500 per candidate to do the exam, which is fine if you're going to be a dentist, right? You graduate, you can make a couple $100,000. But the other piece that comes in here is the reliability and validity. So if we do an exam and we fail people and we have to legally defend the exam as being fair, you got to have those kinds of numbers. Yes?
Has there been any discussion with schools of social work in British Columbia where there could be some possible individualization, like what Brandy was saying about specific programs and content? Like, why can't it be looked into where exams are done at your school of social work? If there's oral exams or other types of options. Like, I'm a little confused by the point of doing this, because it just seems like there's so many ifs, ands, or buts left. And, I mean, Information Acts, and I don't know. I'm a little confused.
Let me keep going.
Okay.
Okay? I'll answer your question around the focused programs. They offer all kinds of exams, 5 different ones. North American in scope and passing score. Multiple choice, 170, 20 items are pre-tested. There's a 4-hour time limit, accepting accommodations. They follow all the standards for guidelines for examinations. It's about minimum competence. Okay? Much of what your schools teach, and I'm talking right across the country and right around North America, is going to be way, way more than minimum standards. much of the anti-oppressive, the social justice. It's not going to be minimum standards. We're not going to examine it because it's not minimum standards for public safety. There's going to be huge chunks that you learn, which will be really important, but on the ground practicing social work, they're not considered entry to practice competencies. And they're not considered that, not by me, but by the profession, as you'll see. So validity, the exam measures what it's supposed to, and that's hugely arguable and, you know, reliable. We'll talk a little bit about that. It all really does come down to being legally defensible. So we start with practice analysis. Again, the practice analysis will be, and I want to just see